just lightly kissing the roots. It was like, it wasn't doing well. Hello, welcome. My name is Stephanie, and on this channel, I like talking about houseplants. In today's video, I'm talking specifically about Hoya. I'm so excited to film this video because in the past few months, I have not been bitten, but I have been attacked by the Hoya bug. It has attacked me and it has taken hold of me and it's not letting go. So in today's video, I'm so excited to share what I've learned in the past 5 months of collecting Hoya. I still consider myself a Hoya beginner, so I'm sharing this video from a beginner's point of view. If you're starting to get into Hoya, I would like to share with you 5 tips that I really wish I knew 5 months ago. And I would also like to share my top 5 Hoya that are easy and fast growing that new Hoya collectors or beginners to Hoya would really enjoy and find quite satisfying. So if you want to find out my 5 tips and my 5 recommended Hoya for beginners, let's go. Tip number 1. The first tip I would like to share is to buy a rooted plant. I know buying a cutting is so much cheaper than buying an already rooted teeny little plant. I know, but Hoya, a lot of Hoya, I find can take a really long time to get established and to get rooted. And by getting unrooted cuttings, you run the risk of rotting. I have rotted a few cuttings and that can be tough, especially if you've already paid quite a bit of money for those cuttings. So I recommend getting rooted plants, or if they're just partially rooted, maybe they've already been rooting in water and they're starting to push out new roots, maybe you can go for that. But fresh cuttings can be risky, especially if you're just buying a cutting with just 1 or 2 leaves on it. One leafed cutting is very, very risky because with Hoya, if there are no leaves on the stem, in my experience, what I've seen, that stem or that little stick will not root. With Hoya, I don't think there's anything such as wet sticks growing Hoya, sticking them in moss to try to get them to grow roots and then new growth will push out like a philodendron, a monstera. Hoya, in my experience, from what I've seen in the past 5 months with the plants that I've had, they do not work this way. So I highly recommend getting an already established plant that already has roots, and even better, that's already pushing out new growth. That way, you're more guaranteed to have success with your new plant. The plant that I'd like to share that ties in nicely with point number 1 is, again, one that I would recommend for beginners, and that is the Hoya Crassipetiolata Splash. I absolutely love this Hoya for so many reasons. The first reason I love it is that it is a really fast grower. This plant, it wastes no time. It grows very, very quickly and it is quite satisfying. I like fast growing Hoya because it's just so exciting to see it grow. And the faster it grows, the more likely it will be to flower for you. So when I got this plant, it was maybe, I think it only had these leaves on it, these leaves that you could see right here, but it did have a vine. And since I've had it, I believe it has pushed out these 2 leaves here, this leaf here, these 2 leaves up here, and most recently, these leaves here. And if you notice, they're even bigger than the previous leaves. I just absolutely love this plant. I love the dark margins. I've noticed I really like dark margins on Hoya. And I love the beautiful silver splashing on the leaves. It is absolutely stunning. And it is true to your typical Hoya where the leaves are really tough. They get really firm once it's hardened off. And yeah, it grows very quickly. It likes to push out a vine and then grow from the vines. With Hoya, if you have a vine, don't chop the vine off because new leaves will emerge from the vine. Unless your plant, I would say, is maybe stunted or stuck and you've noticed months and months and it hasn't done anything, that's when I probably would chop off that vine to sort of force the plant to restart. But if you're new, keep those vines. That's where your new growth will come out of. And you can see right here, it has another little growth, another little plant coming out. And I've noticed this plant is a little bit on the thirstier side. I let this dry out too much and it did lose that leaf here. So the point that I was making about getting a rooted plant is when I got this plant in here was already rooted. Fun fact, there are two plants in here. This was already rooted, and notice how quickly it pushed out this vine and pushed out new leaves. Whereas I bought this 2-leaf cutting, I actually bought this before I got this vine, before I got this plant. And this 2-leaf cutting is only recently pushing out new growth. So it only recently pushed out this new leaf here and has begun to push out more new growth here. But sorry, my cat is trying to jump up here and she will knock down this camera. It's only recently started growing. So imagine if I only had this tiny little guy, I would have been so disappointed. I would have been waiting so long and be so frustrated waiting for it to grow. So some Hoya, especially when there are no roots, they take a long time. So I have this plant in Molly's aeroid potting mix, and this is the #1 substrate that I would recommend for Hoya. And I have a substrate video coming up in the future about water, pond, leca, aeroid mix, and soil. That's coming up in the future. But for now, you'll notice a pattern or a theme in this video. I love, although I have some Hoya in pond, I love Molly's aeroid potting mix, or just aeroid potting mix in general for Hoya. I've noticed they perform the best in it. But anyways, that's my recommendation. Tip #1, buy a plant that already has roots or is already starting to push out roots, because to start it from scratch, growing it in water, that takes a longer time and your likelihood of success is a lot lower than if you already have a rooted plant. I mean, it goes without saying, but I feel like with Hoya, I've had a hard time rooting them. So I highly recommend getting them already rooted. That's what I'm going to do moving forward with most plants, although there are some that getting a rooted cutting is really hard. So I'm going to risk it. I'm going to brave it and get unrooted cuttings, but I recommend getting rooted ones. Tip #2 actually goes against my rule when it comes to all of my houseplants. And my tip #2 is, when you get a new Hoya, do not repot it immediately. I know. That's rich coming from me, because my rule, whenever a new houseplant comes into my home, I repot that plant immediately. This has helped me to keep pests at a minimum. The most pests that I have in my home is, I would say, spider mites and fungus gnats, occasionally fungus gnats, and spider mites only on my my huge fiddly fig. But I have not had any other pests that I know of or I have noticed, because I have kept this rule. I've never had mealybugs. I had a plant that came in with mealybugs, but it came in, I isolated it and I eradicated mealybugs. So I've never dealt with any other type of pests in my home, because I've stuck to this rule. However, with Hoya, they do take a while to acclimate or to adjust when you've repotted them. They take so long, and depending on the plant, it may go months and months without no growth, without doing anything. It may even lose leaves, because they can struggle quite a bit when you switch that medium. So I would highly recommend, #1, when you get it, keep it in its medium, especially if it's one of these uncommon to rare Hoya. I would keep it in its medium. For common ones, I would switch out that medium, because I know if I lose it or if anything happens, I could go to the store and get a new one. But with the uncommon ones, I recommend keeping it, if they're rooted, in the medium that they came in, especially if they're happy, they're healthy, do that. And with that in mind, I will show you my #2 recommendation for beginners. And this is the Hoya Latifolia Sarawak. I examined the roots thoroughly. So again, I'm saying this, but I'm advising or warning to really examine your roots. Firstly, isolate the plant for a few days, keep a close eye on the roots, look out for mealybugs or anything crawling, creepy crawlers on the roots. Even if you just take it out the pot, lightly spray it down with your pesticide that you typically use. Really take all the measures that you would take. Like I would spray down the roots, spray down the entire plant, isolate it for like a week or two, keep it on the side. I have the space that I can do that, and so I will. It's important to me not to introduce pests. And that's what I did with this plant. I've kept it. The seller had a really good mix. She made her own chunky aroid mix, and it was a really good mixture. And so I decided to keep the plant in it. And it only came with these two leaves when I first got it, the two bottom leaves. So 1 and 2. And since I've had it, I think it's been I had it since February. I'm not sure. I will sort of link the haul videos. They'll be in the description box as well. But since then, I have been able to get 1, 2, 3 new leaves, and it's pushing out some new growth at the top here. And it's been doing really well. As to whether this plant is an easy plant or it's doing well because I didn't repot it, I honestly don't know, and I can't say. But the plant has been easy for me so far. It hasn't given me any yellowing leaves. I absolutely adore the gigantic, it's also called the dinner plate Hoya. I adore the huge, very succulent leaves. I love how sun-stressed this plant can look. I absolutely love this plant. I wouldn't say it's slow growing, but I wouldn't call it fast growing either. It's growing at just the perfect rate, not too fast, not too slow, because it will push out a new leaf and then it'll take a few weeks for the new leaf to really get to its true size that it should be and harden off. And yeah, it's a really satisfying plant. And because it's not variegated, this one, you don't have to give it the brightest amount of light in order to keep any variegation. And I think that's what helps it to be such a good grower, because there's more leaf space, there's more surface area. That's what I want to say. There's more surface area for it to really photosynthesize and to do really well. But it's such an easy Hoya. It's one of those plants that you could just set and forget, and it will not disappoint you. It's a good growing plant, and it's a bit thirsty. I have noticed that it's a bit on the thirsty side. It does drink a little bit of water, more than I thought it would, because Hoya people tend to say don't overwater your Hoya, but that's another point that's coming. But I definitely recommend this plant for newbies. It is really easy and really nice and satisfying, and it'll get nice and big where you feel like I've got a Hoya. You know, it makes me feel like, yeah, I've got one of these big Hoya with the nice firm leaves. It makes me feel like a real Hoya collector, because when I think of a Hoya, I think of these really big succulent leaves. So I recommend this one for newbies. Here's another example of point number 2 of not repotting your Hoya as soon as you get it. So here is another plant that I would recommend, and that is the Hoya Carnosa Crimson Queen. The Carnosas in general are a very, very easy line of Hoya, in that they're very forgiving, they're very patient, and also they're pretty because they've got these beautiful variegated leaves. When I first got this plant, I was just starting to learn about pon and experiment with pon. And so what I did, I have an entire video on it. I took this plant out of soil and I put it into pon. That was a few months ago. And it took this plant so long to acclimate, to adjust to being in pon. And trust me, I have lots of plants that I've transplanted, lots of plants that I've switched mediums, and by far this was one of the longest. With Hoya, they are the longest to acclimate and get used to a new potting medium. And I lost a few leaves along the way, but only maybe in the past month, it finally I think rooted, it finally adjusted, and it has acclimated, and it has pushed out, I think, all of these leaves down here are all new growth, and you can see new growth coming in here. These are new leaves, new growth up here. Let's see, new leaves, new growth up here, lots of variegation in here. And this is so heavy, pond is so heavy. And then some new leaves, the variegation got a little better here. It looks really good. And I really, really recommend this plant. And again, it just shows how easy and forgiving this plant is. I think if I had done it to any other of my more finicky Hoya, I think I would have lost it completely already. I think I would have lost it. But this plant, because the Carnosa, this one is super hardy and resilient. It definitely forgave me, and it has pulled through. So if you're a newbie, this plant is for you. The Carnosa line, the Crimson Princess, Crimson Queen, they're really, really forgiving, and it allows you time to sort of figure out the plant without just, losing all the leaves and then, and I noticed that Hoya, it takes a while. Like, you have to really make them unhappy for them to lose leaves, at least the Carnosas. And so, yeah, I definitely recommend this. It's super easy. Again, if you lose it, it's very easy to find, at least in my area. But I think in most places, the Crimson Queens are easy to find, and you can easily get a new one of it if you do mess it up in some way, which I find it very hard to believe. But yeah, this one again is another one that I recommend. But again, it goes to show, even if this plant is super hardy and really a very easy Hoya and very forgiving, easygoing, still when I switched the substrate, it struggled. It took a long time. So it just goes to show, don't change that substrate unless you really, really have to. How's the video going so far? Like what you see? If you do, consider giving it a thumbs up so I know that you like this video and content like this. And you may want to consider subscribing, because that way you can easily have access to my videos in the future. Okay, let's keep going. And that takes us to point number 3, which I sort of touched on a little bit earlier, and that has to do with watering. A lot of people say, oh, Hoya, you don't give them too much water. They're quite, they've got large succulent leaves. Don't give them too much water. Of course, you don't want to overwater any plant. No plant likes to be drowning in water. But even if Hoyas have very thick succulent leaves, I've noticed that a lot of Hoya are still quite thirsty, especially thin-leafed Hoya. So I would definitely not wait and do that taco test, wait until the leaves get too wrinkly and squish it. For me, I feel like that is way too late to be watering your plant. The plant at that point is dehydrated, and that's when you're most likely to get root rot, because roots don't like to completely dry out and get water introduced again. That is dangerous, at least for me, in my experience. So I recommend keeping them hydrated. I like to put my plants in a self-watering setup. And that takes me to my Hoya recommendation number 3. And that is the Hoya Carnosa Freckles Splash. So you'll notice on this list, I'll have a few common and uncommon plants that I'll be sharing. So it's a nice mix. But yes, this is one of my absolute favorite Hoyas in my collection. This plant is absolutely stunning. I love this plant. I just want to say it in case you didn't notice, in case you didn't hear me. For those in the back, I love this plant. The variegation, the splashing, absolutely amazing. I love it. And what I love, the reason I recommend this plant to beginners, is that this plant is so easy to care for. It is so easy. It's so satisfying because it's from the Carnosa family. And the Carnosa family tends to be very easy to care for plants. But anyways, I was talking about watering. And with this plant and with a lot of my other Hoya, I have noticed that if I let them dry out, or if I leave the water reservoir to be a bit too low, I will notice that the growth significantly slows down. So I have done in recent times, I've tried to keep the water reservoir not too high up to drown the plant, but just the right height, just below the roots, like almost like just lightly kissing the roots. so that they're not soaked in it, but they know, oh, there's water here, and they know to reach for it and that they can have access to it. And because of that, this plant has been thriving. So it has pushed out this new growth point here. And in addition to that, where is it? It looks like another uh, area or growth point has been activated. I'm not sure if you could see it. It's super tiny. It's right here between this new branch and this leaf. A tiny little growth point has been activated. And if you've noticed, the last two leaves here are not very variegated. So I said to myself, okay, I'm just gonna chop this off, but it already activated a node on its own. And then I said, okay, how about I try to make this plant a little fuller and chop this here and then stick this back in, grow it again. And then down below right here, I don't know if you can see it, and I'm not trying to get water on all my stuff. If you can't see it, I'll add like an overview, a top view later. But there's a node activated right here. And I'm just like, ah, it's so easy. It's such an amazing plant. I recommend all the Carnosas because they're super duper easy. But my point is, even if they've got these big succulent leaves, don't wait and do the taco bendy test. Don't do that. Just keep them hydrated and they will grow even faster for you. So I recommend a self-watering pot or doing a setup like this where, you know, like I mentioned, it has access. There's a water reservoir and it can easily access the water. This Hoya is growing in pond. Not my favorite setup for growing Hoya, but like I mentioned before, since they can really slow down when you repot them, I've decided to just keep this in pond since it's already doing well. Just as long as it's growing, that's fine. And eventually when it gets root bound, which I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon because I've noticed Hoya don't really get root bound very quickly. But eventually, if I notice it does need to be uppotted, repotted, just a little change up, then I'll probably put it into maybe an aeroid mix. But even then, I doubt. I think I might just keep it in pond because it loves pond and it's been doing really well. But again, if you want sort of a Hoya with lots of splashing, lots of variegation, but you don't want a tricky plant that's going to give you a headache, I recommend this one. It's from the Carnosa family and it's going to do really well. Again, this one is the Hoya Carnosa Freckles Splash. Okay, now we're at point number 4. And point number 4 is to research your Hoya. Research one before you buy it. Make sure, just like with every other plant, make sure you have the right growing conditions. You're able to give it the care that it needs. And you may think, well, aren't all Hoya the same? Actually, no, they're not. I've noticed that some Hoya prefer a little bit of extra humidity and some Hoya don't. I know a lot of Hoya collectors just put all of their Hoya in a grow tent and they seem to do really well. But for me, I don't have a place that I could keep all my Hoya in high humidity. And honestly, I don't know if I want to just have all my Hoya just locked up in a tent. I like having them sprinkled throughout my house so that I can enjoy them and look at them often. So if you're like me, it's important to know if the Hoya that you want are able to grow in the conditions that you have. And some Hoya really genuinely do like higher humidity because I've had some and it was the Hoya globulosa, cow dang. Oh my, I can't even say that, but I'll put a picture up. And that one did nothing for me. And then when I put it into higher humidity behind me, that's when it started pushing out new leaves. So take a look. For me, I think I prefer Hoya that don't need higher humidity. And that's why I would recommend this really easygoing one. And like the Carnosa, the Hoya Australis is a very easygoing line of Hoya. This plant, it was my very first Hoya, my very first one. And so it definitely took a beating from me. It has been on, if you've watched my favorites videos, it has been on my comeback list. And I actually wanted to put it on my comeback list twice because it went down and then it came back, and then I messed it up again, and then it went down and then it came back again. So anyways, it just goes to show that it's really important to check to see if you have the good growing conditions for it, because I've noticed that this Hoya, as easygoing as it is, it did not like cooler temperatures. So I had it in my basement, and it was by the window where you could get that really good bright light. So even if it was getting a lot of very bright light in the basement, it actually did not like the cooler temperatures in the basement. And so the growth on it significantly slowed down. But since then, I brought it upstairs and I put it in my west facing window where it gets lots of very, very bright light. And then in the afternoon, it gets direct sunlight, and it thrived. It's now starting to really make its final, hopefully its final comeback, and I won't mess it up again. But yeah, it just goes to show that you need to make sure you have the right growing conditions. Some Hoya do not like very, very bright light. And that was hard for me because I mostly have west and south facing windows in my home. So those Hoya struggled in my home a little bit because I had too much light. So I had to sort of put them in a place that had a little bit of lower light. Versus if you mostly have lower light, then you may not want to get Hoya that really like bright light. Of the highly variegated Hoya, the Hushkilianas, so you definitely want to research the conditions, the humidity, how much light that it needs, and how much water that it needs. Some of them do prefer getting watered regularly. Could you put it in a self-watering setup, or are you able to water it frequently? These are things that you have to consider. But definitely, especially if you're buying more expensive Hoya, like I would definitely recommend researching them first to ensure that you're giving them the right care that they need. Okay, and my fifth and final point has to do with price. If you're collecting Hoya now, there may be a lot of the prettier Hoya. When I say pretty, I mean like the higher variegated Hoya, the very splashy Hoya. They tend to be a bit more expensive. And so sometimes it can be really tempting to spend a lot of money on a tiny little cutting, or even if it's bigger, sometimes it's really tempting to spend a lot of money on Hoya. And if it's in your budget, if you can do it, if you want to, go for it. But for me, it's not an option for me. And something that I have learned is to wait. I've noticed that the Hoya market, because Hoya is starting to bloom and blossom and really take off now. I mean, in Hoya collecting, not the plants itself, there are more and more Hoya collectors. And so the prices of Hoya are starting to come down faster. So maybe a plant may come out and it may, or become popular, I should say, and it's really expensive. But then you'd find that before it would take maybe a couple of years for the prices to come down. Now, in 6 months or less, the prices are significantly lower. Again, it depends on your area. It depends on the availability and how many sellers there are in your area. In some areas where there aren't that many Hoya sellers, the prices could stay up higher for longer. But for me, again, this is my experience, because I live in a city, a bigger city, and I'm closer to like an even bigger city, like a metropolitan city. I'm able to be able to buy from sellers in the big city, or there are like Hoya stores nearby. And so the prices are a little bit lower because there's more competition, and so it's coming down faster. So do your research, look around. You may be surprised. There might be some collectors around you, maybe Facebook Marketplace, or just search on Google for rare plant stores and keep your eye on the prices. The reason I say that is because of this one, and this is the Hoya Coriacea Silver. This is my favorite Hoya in my collection. And thankfully, I got it at a really great price. After a while, when I researched, I bought it. And after, when I researched it, even to do this video, I researched how much this plant was. A cutting, just a tiny cutting, how much it is on some websites. I just couldn't believe the prices. I literally, she gave it to me for free, basically, because of like how much I paid for it. But I do see this selling for at other places much more. My point is, do your research, look around. You may find a private seller who may sell it for significantly less, for much cheaper than other places. Or just wait a few months and the prices will come down, hopefully, eventually. But again, this is my favorite Hoya. This is the Hoya Coriacea Silver. I finally learned how to say the name. And so this is by far my most favorite Hoya because it has the most beautiful leaves. The green is what the variegation is. Like the splashing is green. So the background, the backdrop of the leaf, the leaf is covered in silver, and then it has splashes of green. And it is one of the fastest growing Hoya in my collection. I've said that before. If you watched my Hoya collection video, I mentioned that. It is one of the fastest growing Hoya in my collection, and it is very easygoing. It speaks to all of the points that I've mentioned before. When I first got it, I repotted it immediately and it sort of held it back a bit. Again, when I first got it, I thought that, oh, people say that you shouldn't water Hoya too much. And I didn't give it that much water and it took forever to grow. And I wondered what was happening, why it was happening. But again, it's a great Hoya for beginners because even if it didn't grow and it didn't do much because I was underwatering it, it didn't lose any leaves. It hung in there. It was patient with me until I figured out, oh, I think this Hoya might be a little bit thirsty. And then I started watering it and I noticed a direct link between how much I watered it and its growth. It definitely is really fast growing. It's beautiful. It's satisfying in that it grows really well, very beginner friendly. And yeah, that's this one. This plant can almost do no wrong in my eyes. It is absolutely beautiful. I did get it as a rooted cutting, so that's probably why it's performing a lot better for me. Probably if I got it just unrooted, it might have taken longer. I don't know, but I did repot it, and so that could be why it was slow in the beginning. But anyways, I have it here in my own DIY aeroid potting mix. I would love to share the details with you, but I haven't perfected it yet, so that's coming in the future. But again, this is by far my favorite Hoya. As a beginner, if you want an uncommon Hoya, like a rarer one, you want to splurge on a Hoya, but you don't want it to be like you buy it and then it loses all its leaves, like it's very difficult. I recommend this one. This one is satisfying, fast growing. It's a little expensive now, but I do think the prices are going to come down really soon. And then yeah, so this is the care. I have it on this sort of DIY trellis. And to show you again how resilient this plant is, I managed to accidentally bang this, so it was starting to break here, right here, and it was literally hanging on by a thread. It was like it wasn't doing well, and I was looking for tape because I saw Jenna and Jenna's plant. She taped up hers, and I was like, that's brilliant, but I couldn't find tape in my house. So all I did is that I propped it up against like a pole or something next to it, and look at it, it's holding up beautifully. It's almost like it's healed. I'm not gonna test it. I'm gonna put it back up how I found it. But again, it just shows how hardy, how resilient, and how happy this plant is. So easy, and it's definitely worth it. My plans is that hopefully if these two leaves, if they don't fall off from the shock, and if they do like fully grow, I'm gonna cut it here and stick it back in here and propagate it, and then I'll really know what propagating this plant is like. But yeah, that's it. So these are, I think I listed 5 Hoya. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oops, I listed 6 Hoya, so a bonus one. So these are my 6 Hoya that I would recommend for beginners, and my 5 tips that I would recommend that you keep in mind if you're a Hoya beginner. Thanks for watching today's video. I appreciate you spending some of your day with me. If you liked this video, you may like some of these other videos here. That's my cat. And you can subscribe by clicking right here. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.